Hey everyone, welcome to Bumbling Through Dungeons. My name is Mark, and today we're talking about losing and why being a loser can be fun. Let's get into it. So, you know what's fun? Winning. Winning's fun. We all know winning's fun. And I came from when I started playing D&D, my most recent gaming experience wasn't in tabletop RPGs. I played some RPGs, but they were mostly video games, and I played some MMOs. And in MMOs, losing's not fun. Losing is a grind. And you know what is fun is optimizing until you win, and you win so decisively that it was never in question. That's what's fun in those games. And there are people who have that mentality in any game. I had to shake that mentality in board games a little bit too, because I always wanted to optimize everything about what I was doing, and I was really combative and competitive. And when I finally shed that mentality, I win less now when I play board games, but I have more fun. And so I feel like I'm actually winning more in a metaphoric sense, even though I lose more. So yeah, I want to talk in this video a little bit about losing in D&D and what that means, because we're going to define losing in a somewhat nebulous way that takes it in a couple different directions, but talks about how setbacks and losses within the game can actually be points of great interest and growth for you. So I think D&D is somewhat unique in this sense, or maybe tabletop RPGs are unique in this sense. If you die in a video game, if you lose at a board game, it's not a potential point of growth. It's just something where you need to reload your last save and try it again, or the board game's over and maybe you learned something from your loss, but it isn't something that is developing into a narrative arc. So there are board games that are starting to do that have narrative arcs, that are starting to simulate some of the things that you see in RPGs. Those would be the exception, but that's why I want to talk about RPGs and setbacks and losses within them. So this video isn't advocating losing. It isn't advocating throwing fights and having horrible things happen to you, but I think one of the hallmarks of D&D is that crazy, weird, goofy, awful, terrible things are going to happen to you and your party on occasion. If they don't, then it'll probably start to seem a little bit sameish over the course of a campaign, and it might start to seem a little bit too easy. So even dating back to the earliest days of D&D, you know, Gary Gygax's players were probably very used to losing. And some of the dungeons that Gygax ran, and many of those who were running games at the same time as Gygax, were running dungeons and games that were very much designed to have the players lose eventually, and it was the player's job to avoid that as long as possible. But sometimes the actual loss, which in their case was usually death, could be fun because it was always interesting, and that tension was always there, so that when it did inevitably happen, like say they were running Tomb of Horrors or something like that, where it was almost an inevitability that the players would end up dead, sometimes that was funny or fun or interesting in how far they could get and what puzzles they could solve before their doom. So I don't necessarily think that endless deaths in grindhouse dungeons are fun, but I do think that there's a kernel of wisdom embedded in that play style where you can lean into the failures of your character and the failures of your party as opportunities to find out really interesting things about the game and about yourselves. So I'll give you an example. I was in a Curse of Strahd campaign, and I've talked about my Curse of Strahd campaign a few times here on the channel. Had a lot of fun with it. It was a great campaign, and we had one session that was a really bad session in an otherwise great campaign. And I don't think anyone else who was involved with it would argue that it wasn't the greatest of sessions. And it felt a little bit like a slog because we couldn't make any of our rolls, but even beyond that, we failed at a number of basic tasks that we were trying to accomplish, to the point where by the end of the session, we were actually further behind in our goal, in our progression toward our goals, than we were at the beginning. So we had actually regressed by the end of the session. Now, I'm not going to tell you that that session was super fun, and in retrospect, I loved it. No, nothing like that. But what I will say is it proved a turning point for our group. And it was because after that, we kind of wanted to avoid the same thing happening, or the same types of things happening. And what it did, I think, as a result, what I noticed within the group, and to a certain extent within myself, is that we became a little bit more focused. We became a little bit more goal-oriented, and we became more methodical in how we processed information and how we prioritized what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. So prior to that point, we were having a good time and we were trying to be strategic about things, but at the same time, we weren't putting as much thought into our actions as we did after the fact. And so it galvanized the party, both us as players and the characters within it, to focus on the task at hand a little bit more. And I think that we had some of our most productive, interesting sessions immediately following that, because we started to realize, okay, this world, this campaign world, is going to take from us unless we make sure that we are, handling ourselves in an intelligent, deliberate manner. So going loosey-goosey through a campaign and not really thinking through your strategies can be a fun way to do things as well. But if you've got a narratively driven, plot-driven story, then I think that there are worse things you could do than focus on how you achieve that and go deliberately in that direction. And I'm not sure we were doing that up until that point as well as we did after that point. The other thing that I like to do is anytime I have, even if it's just a bad combat encounter where I get knocked unconscious twice, or I can't hit anything and everybody else is doing all these cool things and I don't really contribute, it's easy to look at that and sort of sulk and say, well, I'm not contributing as much as the other group members, I don't feel great about myself, and to start enjoying it less. Now, I won't tell you that that initial reaction is wrong. Everyone wants to feel like they're contributing. Everyone wants to feel like they can do cool, awesome, interesting, unique, clever stuff. But when inevitably the dice rolls go against you, or just whatever happens in the session goes against you, I would challenge you, as I've challenged myself, to say to myself, all right, how would my character react to this believably, and what would that mean for them in terms of character progression? So a lot of the most interesting role-playing developments I've had with characters that I've played have come about because of situations like this. If, for example, your character is having a hard time identifying with or getting to know or befriending some of the other characters, what happens if your character goes unconscious and might die and someone else saves them? How does that reflect? How does that change how you look at them, how you feel about them and their companionship and your adventuring together? A lot of times there can be rivalries or clashes of personality, and this cauldron of success and failure and helping one another out can provide a lot of opportunity for growth in that area. And last but not least, I want to talk about the potentially ultimate failure in D&D, and that's a TPK. So everybody dies, campaign over. And this is undoubtedly a loss. You're losing your character, you're losing the party, you're losing whatever momentum you had with the campaign. And so this can be a loss in more than a character sense. It can be a loss in that a lot of times TPKs kill campaigns or kill RPG groups out of game. And I've known people who said, oh, we TPK'd and then we didn't get anything new started and now I don't see those people anymore. So this can be a very tangible loss in a number of ways. And I want to talk a little bit about it and how you might be able to turn it into, if not a positive, at least take it in a different direction that isn't a total loss. So first off, I don't like TPKs, but I like the possibility of TPKs. I think that if death isn't a possibility in my games, it lacks a certain tension that I think gives it a narrative weight. And I like that. So I have experienced a TPK, or at least one that was so close to it. 4 out of 5 of us died. So in every way, shape, and form that mattered, it was a TPK with just that one character getting away. But I've talked to people who a TPK kills the campaign, and I've talked to other people who will say, oh, your group died. Well, I hope that's not the end of your campaign, because their groups take it as a jumping off point for what comes next. And oftentimes what comes next isn't a completely new setting or campaign, but it's a continuation of whatever story is going on there. And I think where a lot of groups and DMs and players get caught up is that you think to yourself, well, our group died, so we need to jump in with new PCs and pick it up right from this point where we died and then just continue along. And that isn't necessarily the case. So what I found can be very interesting in these cases and very useful in these cases is to have a group conversation about, maybe even you take a week or two off and then you come back and you say to yourselves, all right, what changes in the world as a result of our party's failure? And then imagine the world state in a week, a month, a year, 10 years, 100 years. So how does that failure inform what happens in the larger world? And then what type of campaign might exist within that new world that resulted from the failure? This is interesting for a number of reasons to me. One, it's a collaborative experience, which is great. That's one of the hallmarks of D&D and role-playing games and improving. So you get to sort of create this shared story together, bouncing ideas off of one another. And then two, it allows you to create a new world state. And maybe what your party was doing was not very portentous. Maybe it wasn't earth-shattering. So maybe you find small ways to incorporate that failure into a new campaign that's set in a nearby city, town, region, whatever. But maybe you were level 15 heroes and you were trying to save the world from an evil tyrant who was going to take over the kingdom and bring a demon army or, whatever it might be. And if you fail, then bad things happen in the world. So one of the coolest, some of the coolest campaign ideas I've heard, and not even campaign ideas, but campaigns that have actually happened, have come about with this sort of improvisational exercise where the heroes fail to stop the cataclysmic event, and then the next campaign takes place after that cataclysmic event, and they're having to live with the consequences of that failure. And the new party, the new group that they're playing with might be trying to fix things, or they might just be trying to survive in that new world. So I think either one of those possibilities can be very interesting, but it allows you to jump off from where you were without having to simply insert new characters into the same exact spot. And if that's the largest type of failure that you can consider, I actually think the smallest types of failure are some of the funniest. Who hasn't laughed when they roll a natural 1 in the worst possible situation? And it might not mean character death, it might not mean the end of the adventure, but it means something bad, and whatever that is probably going to be pretty funny, even if it isn't the greatest for the group in the short term. So these are moments that I live for in D&D, and some of my most memorable moments as a DM or as a player have come about from these sort of minor failures that snowball into crazy circumstances. So that to me is one of the reasons why I say that losing is fun, and that's why I named the video Losing is Fun, because if you rolled all natural 20s, first of all, tell me what demon you made a pact with and sold your soul to, and that you could roll all natural 20s, but I think it would create campaigns that were a lot less interesting. There would be a lot more successes, and a lot more good things would happen to you, but I think you would miss out on some of the fun that D&D can provide and can only provide through failure. So that's it for the video. I hope your campaigns are spectacular successes, and inevitably though, when they are not always successes, I hope they're still a lot of fun. But until next time, take care. Boo! We're the spooky doggos, telling you to subscribe to Bumbling Through Dungeons for quality D&D content. Boo!